Good evening, Americans, and welcome to the Ed Show from New York. America is on the brink of something very dangerous. This is the Ed Show. Let's get to work.
I am not letting my country be ruled by a dictator. I'm not letting anybody take my guns. If it goes 1 inch further, I'm going to start killing people.
The biggest threat to the United States is within our borders. A shocking new report shows anti-government hate groups are thriving in America. A new Dick Cheney documentary reveals he has no regrets.
Creating the sensation of drowning, you don't consider torture?
I don't. Tonight, the new Showtime documentary with featured author Martin Gelman. Plus, there is evidence of Republican voter fraud in Florida. We'll bring you the details. President Obama dines with Republicans, and Karl Rove is back to predicting things. The congressional panel weighs in on the president's GOP outreach and more.
Give me one damn program he said he'd cut.
And Bill O'Reilly loses control over body and mind.
Entitlement, one program.
Why do you want to yell at me?
Because you're lying.
Tonight, we'll break down Bill O'Reilly's childish behavior with Bill O'Reilly's very own body language expert.
Good to have you with us tonight, folks. Thanks for watching. You know, there are some events that happen in your lifetime, some big news events, and you can remember exactly where you were when that news broke. This is the Murrah Federal Building in Oklahoma City on April 19th, 1995. I'll never forget where I was. We were fishing on Lake Erie, and we came off the lake, and we were staying at this cabin, and I was the last one to go up to the cabin. And everybody was just fixated, because I could see through the windows, the big picture windows there. Everybody was just fixated on the television, and I thought to myself, something big has happened. When I got in there and I saw the news, I could not believe that this had happened on American soil, that someone had done this to fellow Americans. And that's why I'm fired up about these facts tonight. Thanks to a new report by the Southern Poverty Law Center, we know that anti-government patriot groups are now at an all-time high in this country. We need to pay attention to this, folks. The increase in threats on the President of the United States and other government targets is similar to the period of time before the Oklahoma City bombing. Researchers are out front asking the American government to create an interagency task force to deal with the problem before it's too late. So let's just break down a few numbers here. In 2008, there were only 149 known militia groups in this country. Last year, there were 1,360, more than 8 times as many. Houston, we got a problem. And as you can see from the Southern Poverty Law Center's chart, the last time we saw this number of armed nationalist groups was in the Clinton years. The Southern Poverty Law Center says it was a similar spike back in 1995, just as we are seeing today. Now, the president of the Southern Poverty Law Center has written a letter to the Department of Homeland Security and the Justice Department recommending 2 departments combine resources to protect against an act of aggression against the American government. Now, these numbers jumped when President Obama became president. They have now jumped again as he has taken on the National Rifle Association. The NRA has done everything in its power to paint the President of the United States as some threat to gun owners everywhere.
All that first-term lip service to gun owners is just part of a massive Obama conspiracy to deceive voters and hide his true intentions to destroy the Second Amendment during his second term.
Conspiracy, conspiracy, conspiracy. Let's forget what the American people want. Oh, it's President Obama. It doesn't stop with the NRA. The rhetoric of the conservative media has turned dangerously alarming.
The Obama administration, through all this appeasement and apologizing, answers to the Quran first and to the Constitution second.
Barack Obama is destroying America based on lies.
You don't like Obamacare. You feel that it's unconstitutional, bad for the country, and on and on.
Going to destroy us.
Okay, going to destroy the country.
Going to destroy us. Getting 30 million more people health care is going to destroy us. Most of the militia groups named by the Southern Poverty Law Center claim that they are not hate groups and they are only exercising their constitutional rights. But all it takes is one person to create another Oklahoma City situation. Take James Cummings. Before Cummings was killed in a domestic violence altercation in 2008, he was preparing an attack on newly elected President Obama with what? A dirty bomb. The Center for Disease Control says Cummings is the first American to come close to assembling the elements of a fully radioactive dirty bomb. In a 2010 Time magazine cover, the story about extreme militias. Well, Cummings' wife is quoted as saying his intentions were to construct a dirty bomb and take it to Washington to kill President Obama. He was planning to hide it in the undercarriage of our motorhome. She says her husband had practiced crossing checkpoints with dangerous materials aboard, taking her and her daughter along for an image of innocence. This is really a frightening reality of extremism in America. The latest report from the Southern Poverty Law Center shows just how dangerous it is and how we cannot let this go unchecked. We need to pay attention to this report. I know I am. Get your cell phones out. I want to know what you think. Tonight's question: does the government need to pay more attention to the militia movement? Text A for yes, text B for no to 67622. You can always go to our blog at ed.msnbc.com and leave a comment there. We'll bring you the results later on in the show. Quite the discussion on this topic tonight. I am joined by Daryl Johnson. He is a former senior analyst for domestic terrorism at the Department of Homeland Security and author of Right-Wing Resurgence. Also with us tonight, Richard Cohen, president of the Southern Poverty Law Center. And also on board tonight is Dr. James Peterson, Director of Africana Studies and Associate Professor of English at Lehigh University. Gentlemen, great to have you with us tonight. Mr. Cohen, you first. What kind of reaction have you received from this report now that it's been out by your organization, the Southern Poverty Law Center?
Well, I think there's a lot of concern, of course, about the numbers that we're talking about, the increase in the number of these conspiracy-minded anti-government groups, the increase in the number of right-wing plots. A lot of talk about it, a lot of concern, but we haven't yet heard from Secretary Napolitano or General Holder. And I think it's really, really very important for them to take this seriously and to increase the number of resources that they're devoting to this growing problem.
So you see a real parallel before Oklahoma City and right now, moving up as far as the rhetoric, the number of groups, and the activity that's out there.
Absolutely, Ed. And 6 months before the Oklahoma City bombing, we sent a letter to Attorney General Reno saying that we were really very, very concerned. And, we feel that same kind of concern now. And I want to point out one thing. You gave the number, almost 1,400 of these anti-government groups. Those figures were collected before the Newtown massacre and before all of this right-wing craziness over, proposed gun control laws now. And so I think that we're likely to see a further spike in these numbers.
Sure. Mr. Johnson, you wrote the 2009 analysis for the Department of Homeland Security about right-wing extremism. It was heavily criticized by conservatives everywhere. You were repudiated by the DHS under pressure and left the agency. Has that experience colored your opinion at all when you hear reports like this come out?
Well, what's colored my opinion is the fact that Department of Homeland Security has not changed since I left. Despite this huge spike in the number of anti-government groups, they still only have one analyst looking at domestic non-Islamic extremism. I find that just quite startling and unsettling to me.
What should be done about it?
Well, I think the SPLC has taken an important step in recommending an interagency task force, but there's other things that can be done. We have a whole generation of analysts and law enforcement officers who've just been coming up through the ranks that have no idea of what they're dealing with because they weren't on the job back in the 1990s. So I'd encourage training. We need to have commitment on the state of federal, state, and local law enforcement to long-term undercover investigations looking into these groups.
Well, Mr. Johnson, how do you know what to take serious and what is a joke? I mean, where do you draw the line? And can analysts actually get to a point where they say, we really need to watch this group, they are going to be trouble?
Yeah, that's one of the difficult aspects of the job. I think one of the things you can look at is the different types of movements we have present here in the United States and look at their histories. Do they have a history of violence? Are they making current calls for violence? Are they making threatening language towards either minority groups or towards government officials? These are types of things that analysts and officers should be looking at.
James Peterson, can we ignore the fact that these groups have increased the intensity under an African-American president?
Absolutely not. I mean, that's an important factor in this whole discussion. We've seen other studies that have tracked the rise of racial animus over the course of Mr. Obama's presidency. And Ed, you've done a lot of work on this show to try to talk about the kind of language that we see coming from the right, sometimes from political leaders around socialism and some of the racialized language. The reason why we want to be cautious and sensible about that kind of language is because it stokes the flames of the sort of radical right-wing groups that are interested in training and preparing for warfare. Now, listen, these groups have the right to do that, but at the end of the day, our government and citizens have to be very, very vigilant about the own extremism that exists in our society.
What would trigger, you think, Mr. Johnson, what would trigger a group to do something?
Well, we're looking at an issue that I hope wasn't going to come to fruition during this next administration. That's the issue of gun control. Yep. This is a very inflammatory issue for these types of groups who've been arming themselves. And actually, they've had conspiracy theories that have perpetuated on the internet for the past, 4 or 5 years, talking about this very fact that there might be a gun ban. And so when we have these types of events like the Newtown Massacre that brings up these issues, they always had the potential to agitate these groups further.
Yeah, Mr. Cohen, in your letter, you brought up the example of this man who posted a rant on YouTube about firearms. Here it is.
I am not letting my country be ruled by a dictator. I'm not letting anybody take my guns. If it goes 1 inch further, I'm going to start killing people.
Are guys like this taken seriously as threats, or is this all talk? Mr. Cohen, what do you think?
You never know, but, who knew of Tim McVeigh before the Oklahoma City bombing? Let me make another point, Ed, if I could, and that is we would never minimize the threat of, Islamic terrorism in this country.
Sure.
9/11 is, the Pearl Harbor of our generation. At the same time, there have been many more right-wing plots than there have been Islamic plots since that period of time. A West Point counterterrorism agency learned or reported that the number of right-wing plots had increased fourfold since the 1990s. So we're really looking for a better balance of law enforcement resources devoted to this issue.
I would imagine this puts a lot of pressure on local law enforcement as well to make sure that they're going to have the training so they can recognize these kinds of things as well and then report them up the chain. Mr. Peterson, Doctor, what about the news today of increased racial tension at Oberlin College campus? Officials at the school are on high alert. Are school campuses particularly vulnerable when it comes to hate attacks?
I don't think that they are. I think, one, Oberlin has such a rich tradition. It's been such a progressive institution for so long that it's sad to see them being challenged by this. What you find on college campuses is there are a lot of these incidences of racialized graffiti, a lot of blackface incidences. And when you take all those things together, there's obviously a lot of work for us to do to sort of reduce tensions in college campuses. And a lot of this has to do with diversity issues, different cultures, different people coming into contact, and making sure that we're being vigilant on college campuses in the same way that we need law enforcement to be vigilant around and dealing with some of these right-wing extremist groups that we're talking about here. So I think universities is kind of a separate issue. There are challenges. We need to address them. Some of them we can address in the classroom. Many of them have to be addressed structurally by hiring more faculty of color, hiring more administrators of color, recruiting and retaining students. There's a comprehensive plan we need to use for the university system.
Well, Mr. Cohen, I would imagine we can see your report on the Southern Poverty Law Center website, and I would encourage our viewers to do just that.
It's a very important report.
It is very important.
Thank you, Ed.
No question. You bet. Daryl Johnson, Richard Cohen, and James Peterson, thanks for your time tonight on this very important subject. Remember to answer tonight's question right there at the bottom of the screen. Share your thoughts with us on Twitter at Ed Show and on Facebook. We want to know what you think. Well, Shooter, he's back. And he says that if he had a chance, he'd do it all over again. The same way. That's next.
I don't. Tonight, the new Showtime documentary with featured author Martin Gelman. Plus, there is evidence of Republican voter fraud in Florida. We'll bring you the details. President Obama dines with Republicans, and Karl Rove is is back to Britain.
Because you're lying.
Tonight, we'll break down Bill O'Reilly's childish behavior with Bill O'Reilly's very own body language expert.
Good to have you with us tonight, folks. Thanks for watching. You know, there are some events that happen in your lifetime, some big news events, and
the biggest threat to the United States is within our borders. A shocking new report shows anti-government hate groups are thriving in America. A new Dick Cheney documentary reveals he has no regrets.
Creating the sensation of drowning, you don't consider torture.
Good evening, Americans, and welcome to the Ed Show from New York. America is on the brink of something very dangerous. This is the Ed Show. Let's get to work.
I am not letting my country be ruled by a dictator. I'm not letting anybody take my guns. If it goes 1 inch further, I'm going to start killing people.
Predicting things. The congressional panel weighs in on the president's GOP outreach and more.
Give me one damn program he said he'd cut.
And Bill O'Reilly loses control over body and mind.
Not entitlement. One program.